Okay, welcome back for the last hour of discussion, where we will broaden the conversation to anything that our speakers today have discussed, but also the very general issues of science, Buddhism, brain, and mind.
This Geshe di chapter danje ene jik nangju da tseri kana shin ene jik da lebada dewa yobe ki dewa khari shimbine ene kuni digos.
Also would like to invite the audience to not only continue to give questions for this session, but in particular to consider making comments about the conference you are experiencing and suggestions, because this is the second. In your suggestions, your feedback, your comments, and you use the same white cards for those too.
I'm going
to start with a great question. It's very simple, that I will toss to the three people to my right. Is there a limit for the capacity of our brain to learn and store information?
It's a simple question with a complicated answer, but my answer is if there is a limit, we haven't found it yet.
Anyone else care to venture deeper into the water?
No, I mean, I think that what Eric has said is right. But on the other hand, if we were to broaden that question, which is, are there limits to what, to use the other word, the mind can grasp, and not just the brain can process. We do know certain things that are provably true, right? So there are certain things that mathematicians, for example, have found about the limits of our capacity to represent informal systems anyway. But that's a very, very technical and involved answer.
I would like to pivot the same question to Geshe and ask whether in Buddhist tradition there's understood or thought to be any limit to what the brain, the mind can do in terms of knowledge or awareness.
In Buddhism, the Nangjula Tandatara, Nang Simgi da Chu Doye de la Tad Seke Yormes, Tiwading Altangis Udwa. In Buddhism, unlike physical body, the luminous cognitive nature of the mind is such that however much you get habituated with it, the more you can make progress. I mean, until you reach total enlightenment. So there's no limit. So it's not like training the body. If you train the body, then even if the world's number one person in long jump, everybody says he is the number one. But it's not possible for him to jump from one mountain to another mountain. But in the case of mental training, you keep on training. And you will never come across a person who will say, I've now learned so much that my mind cannot move forward. So that shows that the nature of the mind is such is that it can be developed to limitless state.
So we should be suspicious of someone who claims they're number one in thinking.
Komzin bezo charmal mudebas namjing of the love de Giwa, Simji Chuni in Bechir Sidukota, Sang Maje Pardo, Eniko Yargitami and Rotuiji race, the pedal and namjing of the Chonga Chui to Hinos Lagiwa. What the Lulu tending in China, Conzabiling on the Keda Yodingi, the Chumja Javela coat, Pekeda Yores Lavina, Kota and Kitango, Keda Yor Chesa, that things are reaching the Chungu Yorda Sierra within the Halam Koye Yomre, Sejore. The sim gitan tembe yonde in a cocase yerjetan shaina control using that in the Tamed pay to some Jepert pay which your risks.
Okay, again, invite the Geshes to make comments or questions.
Tiwada samju connection is.
The Dakawan, the number soon and do you and the Karsana. Mazu Chitang, the Joshi, only Shio, but the Jackie country stang in say, Tikala, Nijoshikula, and numbers of song take your 13 songs didn't tell you need to watch Shivaina. Tangazu Missicilla, Nijang, Shishatam Chizoy or Mare. Carjina, the Missicilla, neither Jujuzilla, Case Debia on the Tambaina, Gavin, Dungilla Sobia Wangi, and Nichiwa Masebala Sobia, Niti Jang to your Mare, Sonza, Mazu. Chakchi Kiwatamba Kadambi Jonginala, Shonganala Dinison Yorwa. Mazu Chini in Hishinam Dramans, Chi Sejam Chisam Shibi, Nambi Chili Umalan Bashi, Rangito Batanta Lamarja, Siagani, Don Chichi, Tajajina Yore, Tishila Jabi Tony Marang Sam Chivaina, Gang Nichisola Pembata, Rangi, Ganga Doba Yobata, Rangi Ganga Miva Yobatini, Ani Tarshimbachi, Konjiteni, Jani, Jamadini, Rangini, Shiva Yadila Tandanga, Nina Series. Nini Rangi Shiva Tini, Mai, Rangi da Thomas Nanda, Ni Koriki, Ni Chisola Pa, Ni Rochismas na Pa, Ni Chini, Yang Shiva, Mi Shentan Siena Pa, Ni Shivaya Yaki the Dambatan, Dindijini, Jini, Panapitun of Shiva in a Cherry Jean Nala, Garsung years, Huzo Garsegus Nagazamazo, Yamchichi Kaba, Mazo, Takini, Niboji Baina, Kola Tapula Tenia, Pegila to Yoris. Chapon said, Chini, Nini, that Nini, Shini, Tapana Jela Soba, Nipa, Permro, the Digitani, Nisebo said that she Tapungu Kumbu, on the point of say to Yoris. On Dina Sing, the bit in Nansing, Mazovian, Mi Garwachik, Shivaya, Kesan Jiba, Dela Teni, and Michona Pa, and Jacitani, and Shiva Yajitan, the Tanji, Tonguyo, Dindiji, Samguyo. That Dean Susan Dordina Garson in the Shikishna. That Richie Kansanji, Panata Travaji, that Jombodanga Janji, wanted Tambaina, Jombodanga touching Bajang, Nichatonji touching Baji Marde, in Kumichida Babi, and the Umajina, Umadilla touching Bajidan, Dita, Tigana, Jashon Tampotion, Karaji, and Taradoji, Yobaji Tangla, the young Rotavaina, Richie Kansan, D20 Milada, and the Pentodova. That Mikan. Consumption me and Yam to Sobaina, Semal Kiva, New Malakiva, Parchilla Kiva, or the Deligani Kiva dependence on Baina, Jombotanga, touching Baji, Cholapa, and Yakitanya, or Dindiji Tanuji and Dona, and it the Tanam Yakishi, Reta Maresia, Tubadi, and it Jiki Mevaina, Tili Shimbi Tam, and the Kiva numbers of Yanchi, Kariuna Mazula, Lamdonji, Sonrosi, said to Adina, to Jena.
So his question is regarding the extension of knowledge. In Buddhism, it is quoting Shantideva. Shantideva says that life is short, there's so many things to know. We do not know the span of our life. So just like the swans extract milk from water, take what you really need and don't just go after everything. So that is one way of gaining knowledge, extending your knowledge in a deeper sense, not in a wider sense. So from that perspective, you should gain or extend your knowledge in the direction which is desirable, which is beneficial, and which is useful. So he feels that is one way of extending the knowledge. Another process of extending the knowledge is, as you have explained in the classroom, giving the example of the multiplication of the cell and the forming of the cell body. So similar like that, having specialized in particular knowledge, whatever knowledge you have gained, you share it with others. And that way you should also extend your knowledge among the people. For example, in the case of the Buddhist studies, you do the specialization in the sense, for example, not all the 5 major sciences, but let us say focus on Madhyamika. Then in terms of Madhyamika, you can not only study the Madhyamika text by the Tibetan scholars, but also by Indian scholars, also those by the Buddha. So that way you really become a competent scholar in that field of Madhyamika. So in this way, if you're able to really come out with specialized scholars in different fields, that may be perhaps much more effective in extending the knowledge in a deeper sense. So what do you think? Do you agree with me with this kind of process of extension of knowledge? If you don't agree, then what other better suggestions of extending knowledge that you have?
I think I totally agree with that statement. And in fact, I think if you can learn a subject such that you can then teach it, I think that you have the best understanding of that particular topic. And in fact, as a personal note, what I used to do as a student is after I would go to a lecture, I would actually go into an empty classroom as a student and try to teach it to an empty classroom filled with empty chairs. And I felt that if I could teach the subject matter, then I would have a better understanding of that matter. And so I think that if people took a similar attitude about learning, perhaps they would be able to extend their knowledge and incorporate that knowledge a bit more meaningfully.
Thank you, Lord. Gyanachara suya de bed mutuyus, kansana dikation bashira rehas ko desin chigle migar lobjon changje hiyon jajib chedi pekation bureja pena koran chacha wa ina koran kita maung bal gigin che na de samlo che yungdu ani gigin sal chi ni lobdon shugo e de jeshu ani de sarveje lan jinkhang tungba chigl chi ne ani dyun li yode be kubja tijela ani loma yin du shi she ne tuzula ani lobdon chigi yo da kolob nang yo be tu su ji thadik che ne jang yungdu ani ko jungmo sosu ki ta gigin cheje lega lobdon she khari na tuzo thol ko nei mi bada migar ge lobjon tuli chembo yungdos.
Sometimes people would give me strange looks when they saw me waving my hands in front of an empty room, but I didn't mind.
The samsam ganyo be soro kubja ke je khede de enemy khashe yung ne kemu ge khenzar de nam jur de ne do da de che ke mandos.
And the chairs passed all the exams, so it's okay. This question was asked yesterday and now again today, so I think I want to hear this one. It's about plants and their situation in biological terms and in terms of sentience or consciousness, because it seems like in the spectrum of organisms there may be a difference between the way Buddhism and biologists consider sentience or consciousness. So does anyone have a comment, especially regarding plants?
Well, I'll take that one from a neuroscience point of view. And as the Geshus and also the leaders know, plants do not have a nervous system. And from a neuro point of view, because they don't have a nervous system, they don't process information. They take information from the outside world and they do use that information, but because they don't have the same structures as animals, they don't experience life in the same way because they don't have the machinery to do so. So from a neuroscience point of view, they don't have a nervous system. So they can't process information in the same way as an organism with a nervous system. So their experience must be different, if they have an experience at all.
Zixing the Siming Mandawa Carriers Labi Manajirda, and Zixing Gunzo on the Kosu, Teso Yoa Chipa Chadu Yore, Chazan Di Zambala, and Consul Chichi, Kuryuki, any Yalen, Denzo, and Pa Kuryuki, Nizu Denzo, Tantin Denzo, Pa Yalente to be Nuba Yores, Yimbena, Ani Nuba nezu kar yungwa de la yalente to ba zama to ani ji de la ani ji ngazu simje nang shin ani ji ga churwa de du tang nyum de nyong yang ki ani konzo la ki wangbo de yomare sa chuje so de yomare se za khadila du zamba la ani konzo la wangze ki mala se de yomare se ge.
From Buddhist viewpoint, we do not believe plants have consciousness. But at the same time, in number of sutras, it is mentioned plant like animals, flower like animals. They are sentient beings which really looks like a flower. It's not flower, but a sentient being. And there are sentient beings which looks like a plant, but not the ordinary plant, it's a sentient being. So in the case of those, since they are sentient being, they have consciousness.
Just to add, I mean, there's recent work and more so which suggests that plants certainly process information. Right? I mean, that's well known. Now the question is, and this is a very deep question, as to what constitutes the essence of mind from a science perspective. And if it turns out that it's information that is the essential characteristic of mind, and you can show that plants process information that's as complex as what animals do, then you would have to conclude that plants have minds as well, right? So, but these are, we are now at the very cutting edge of what we can even speculate about, let alone prove. But I think that it's not outlandish to imagine that the information complexity of what plants do is comparable to certain animal species, anyway.
Chizan tadangi labde di nangzhu thawna chena chidang chigda hing duzuli chig semyoba chigmares. Hina yang dog nanglo la medo dawi semjen dang hingdung dawi semjen sige dinde yore. Duzu yang hopsite na medo dawi hingdung dawi tongi yore di duzu semjen res. Semjen inzang ko semyo res. Da len dinde raji hiwiro. Dinde na Kurang sungye di nang la 제자 심제 인데 민세데 치로 내수 용괴가라 내수 쿠두 지에데 당 당진 지에 예시 지에데 심제 낭신 지에도 부도나 애니 지힌도 저 심데레 심제레서 라고식 메도스
Okay, Eric.
I might argue that complexity and of information processing may not be an adequate measure of consciousness. For example, if you look at the internet, for example, which has billions and billions and billions of communications and bits and bytes of information, is the internet conscious? That's a question. I don't have an answer. But it may be argued that it is not, and just because we have so many calculations, so many mathematical calculations, doesn't make something conscious.
gakpa jawre resha sabzab chenamado jesa di gakpa jab chawa chix karsiro sena di chige nesu mangbo chi kudu che tu nyarza thuba chikbu ge sem yoba jiba ina any internet duso sem yoba chigu che myos and duso na le bits down bytes down cheje kanje angzi ge thone da nesu mangbo shibu chi nyar tu duas jesa di samji gi sheba yoba che khapure se da gen la ge disu gudo response.
Very quick one, otherwise this will go back and forth. I think that's an invalid comparison. The reason being that the internet is artificial, right? It's a human-created entity. Now, you could argue that natural entities which are informationally as complex are in a different status than artificial ones. So in the same way, like if you're doing physics, if you notice that both electricity and magnetism obey the same principles, you think that they have the same underlying laws, that they are the same phenomenon. But if I simulate electricity on a computer, I don't say that therefore it's the same as magnetism, right? So there's something about natural entities that I think might be different.
The European Union might disagree with you, who has just invested billions of dollars to create an artificial brain based on mechanical circuitry.
I think it's wasted money.
He just said that he thinks that it's a waste of money. So,
Okay, any Gilakuna class level mina any paid digimidus to the Tanda internet pesha digimidus. Mandigo Kimzen Harris Lavi mina internet zo any domi any trajet to me Suesha wiki any Tuji Shagures. Chesa Tanda Niki Shidu Sambala. Negi any fishing sea did any chickmee, Simjanki, any party needs to the Jawasha, no summer, any Rangjung Kuryu, Nang Rangshin, any Chung the Gochagurs, Chung Deva Nashi, and this was any Tumo Maibiki, any Cheju Tone, any Nuba Yazachia, the Nuba process letters of Mountain and Yogur Sita, Yogur Chiaki, any Nuba Yogi, the Neji Tone, any same sea, you. Chowa shaya ke ding shen last ro ane di gena dinde imena ane thanda European tan chinzo yero kunzu ki ane kiran la ta ngabo je res kai ma kunzu ki thanda ane jik Europe ki gomo ane tenbu mangu peje kosong tangje thanda ane ta leba chuji ki leba zuma jik ta soya ki bezon chedi yores ta ta ane dil ta sheba yong krewa chedi yoro ta dil zaman korang la na pesha thola relos.
So this one I'm going to direct to Geshe, but then when he explains what the term means, then I will ask the scientist. We Buddhists believe in Bardo, intermediate life. How about scientists? Do you believe in Bardo?
Yeah.
So what is for we who don't know what intermediate life is? What is it?
Intermediary life is after the death and before you take next life, you are hanging out for 49 days in between, maximum 49 days. It could be shorter. So that state is called intermediary state.
I'd like to say something at this point. There's this very interesting thought experiment someone once mentioned, and I want to know the reaction of Buddhist scholars on this, is that if you've got the same person, leaving a body, hanging out for 49 days and then entering another body, right? And you have bodies multiplying, you have the population going up like anything. Where are all these extra spirits coming from, extra atmas coming from? Because if you need someone to die for the atma to go into another person, now if you have many more people, you need some extra atmas, in a way of reasoning. So,
that some look at around 20 years. That part of the chin and those Kevali, that didn't say Mamuji here, that can't dilate and Zambuling the member she would pay to us. She did member the Mamu pay on that the immediate now you get some low scenario, Dow scenario, the server laying was, the server canile gures. So here it is important to think about the multiverse. It's not just one single universe where you keep on turning it's not just recycling, in the same place. It can be, from different universes. So sometimes the population can goes down, sometimes the population can increase.
It's very useful because you have all these extra universes for the things that you lose and so on.
Exactly.
The lost and found universe.
Yeta the language with the digame conscious is the Samsu Chilaphere. And Chanaso Namjune Jigde Mango Security to us, that drink the Sukium Gores. Jigde Chigra, Chignalola, the recycle sort of shed in the Hitara, in the Digomare, Link Hemban and Ramadan, Chesnut Indigenous, some member Mon Yung to do it, some member Mount to do it. Then the Mendos, that gala Chisway and so on.
Dortiji Shishroa. Tangazo Zambulinga me draw Mambochi Chagadu said, and it indicated that draw the Namto the young chocolate. And the Kawani young Barisna, Kawasna, Nazoga don't comes and make comes here, comes and shake your. ngazu mi la ni khazu ji gu se ge ni thani li chen ji gu sem chen se jurwa ani tonda sipa chi la ko yore ji gu se ge gu ti la tau ka shu gu se ti ti yore ti ti bi ka la kar chi ni ji gu se ge yore la na ani dongkham ni zingkham la si phi chi zingkham ni zingme la phi ani zingme ni yang ma chu dongkham yang zingkham odini chi ni kora da mi chi na ta chi jiwa sum ro sum sum gu len ba yin song zang ani ji gu se ge thani din ri jar ge yore tin song zang ngazu nang ba sang ji bi shong li na la ani sen je ani karso리 장매바당 직된 장매바 감순지 크로딩에 어딘디게 니디네 니 양니 양도 크로와 암로 이차니 로아세도 어딘디 세대게요 된성장 가줄라 안데 렌디 펠리라고 어딘디 지게니 자투 요레스
He says there is a very simple answer. And the simple answer is he's explaining this point by using the Tibetan word called kigu. And that means you take birth several times, not just in the same realm, but we talk about three realms: the form realm, the desire realm, and the formless realm. So the transmigration could be among these different realms. So, and then we of course talk about multiverse. So there is no problem with this. Yeah.
And from a scientific point of view, we're limited by the tools that we have right now. And similar to what Geshe Lhakdor mentioned about different levels of consciousness, I would suggest that current neuroscience only has the tools now to measure that gross level of consciousness, and we don't have the tools to measure other levels. And so it's not that science says yes or no, science says we don't know. And until we have the tools to measure these things, we really can't weigh in on it.
But Tandechala sitting when he have ina Tanji the Shebala Rakwa, the Tamo, the Hindu Towers, Sheba Nashing, the Negi, Sheba Shipsawa Shed, and the Kunzuke Yomar, Lakbar the Sheba Tamurik, Duzurigla, cause Chenje, Tuje Kora Yomaris. Teach you the Tandechala, Tango Shevana Sirigi, Tangazuke Hingmes, Lave Tirares. This
one is also very simple, but very good question. Where does our mind get free will in this causal world?
I'm starting to dislike simple questions.
Maybe there isn't any free will. There's that possibility. There are, I think, several. I mean, this is, of course, a very deep question, and it's impossible to do justice to it. But there are several answers that at least people have tried to give to reconcile free will and determinism, right? One answer which seems plausible from a physics perspective is that while the world might be causally determined, because and as we know from physics, the very small differences in the causal factors can lead to very large differences in outcomes, right? And so therefore, one possibility that scientists have speculated on is that free will is not really free, but it appears to be so, and it's because of these small differences in the causal factors that lead to large differences in outcomes, you can think of it as free, but actually it's not. But I don't believe that. I think that a better answer really is that there are certain parts of the world where we are best, we should best think of it as causal modeling, and in other parts of the world we should model it as free choice by autonomous agents, and our sciences simply are not good enough to come up with a unified answer.
Tani theory gyure temba je sare theory khares labi mena ani tanda ani junreki ani namsha geja shin yu zambala ani gyuda tenchi ani tiu yungya geja she gyure cheza din zamba ding nanglo la ani khangsa ger su ki ani ta khare che ma je ani rawa ki tse di khwali yores free will ane rawa yoda me se di ane rawa yorebe khar chiji rebe yam susu khar chiya di doba yorebe yam ena sangma ane ta nyama leji ki ene ta tangzi wal yorebe se di tiwa dredo chida din sambala gila kurang da jizan zawe chan dila ane len dir se chi ni shaya yo maris yimbe na ane chik tsengri ki nanglo la ta yin siwe ki ane len dinde mangbo yu dig yores di nanglo ni ji kharshi gi yores la bimbe na ane chik ta ngobu thamu ki nekab la le yungdu zambala ane tenzu sangma ane chik jujin khaya yamana chik gyunde rodan di ane tege mewa su rawang ki toni ane ne dang de yungu yobi bene ane tenzu sangma dende ki ane chamu tenzu su ruru su je ane rakbe ki nekab le yungdu zambala ane hini ane chik jodan dewu ki ane rodan di ane ngoy chik deshi gyag yores chirdan ane deshi gyagdan di ane nga kelen chik mes ta yakshu de khares la bina ko ngazu ki ene jigden nanglo yube ki ene ne chu khashin deshe gyabe kapsula ane chig ta le yumde sig yonere ane chig judan dibu rodang thone ane dilatene de chungore se chig deshe gya goya chig yungu yore ya ne chu khashe di ane chig ta free will sidu sambala ane chig tende ane ngeme ki ane juji ki che mare che chig deshe gya mo ba tanda ane susu khar chiji doba yube ki ane ta rawang ji ki wone ane chungre se yungu yore se
Let me give the Buddhist perspective. I mean, it's very much dependent upon what do you mean by free will. As Rajesh has correctly said, if you're talking about complete free, then it is not possible. But apart from that, yes, in Buddhism, we do believe in free will, even though we believe in the law of causality. And therefore, it is extremely important to understand that the word karma has no fatalistic idea. Karma basically means action, which means an action that in which you are the doer. So the action does not necessarily refer to actions that has been done only in the past, but it could be action that you are doing now. It could be an action that you are going to do tomorrow. So therefore, in that sense, you are maker of your own destiny. So therefore, we do believe in free will and do not believe that we are completely doomed or determined. Nangshu ngene chewa ina tanda tasuzul rawa yo mayo sedi ta ko tiba didire gyujin le tene dusun do de ji da khor de ji na ne gir suzul rawa sin de khande yores nubsho ba nanglo la determinism se ne be de tha che sa re suzu she khe yo mar sing ta du chik da ene mare sangma kharchi ne che yore sing ki ta du chik free will sing ta du ni yor da din indi ke je khe chida da free will sing chik di rawa si susul rawa yo mayo di tanda khawa jugme di ra legar bas ina chida na chu ngone cheba ina susul rawa yores nangju Lhakdor di khen go je nangju na le se du ene sangma trubsa ne suzu khujo chune ta me ba tinde chik la sabani ne ko mares le se du kon che seven debe le yore tanda che him le yore mongba te chi debu duye ki le yore tinde chi du mangbo chik ta suzu gi che indu ene di che meje di susul rawa yo dinge chi tinde chik res.
Let's have a question here.
Yeah, nge dewa de kyon Rajesh ga no teni siring kyon de sori teni da siring be lo jara tu mi ren la ta che do gore nga su ta ji him ju che sa de Causal sumba che le me teni shiba sari che de ke ma long we to ne ta ti kam sam de le de ore teni da da teni ji bi yun chen de ne gu ba da jun ta di 편유 동 정관리요. 되네 제동 아주 수익이 여자들 가르쳐도 요새나 수수 해봐도 자지 관리지 동고 레시피 내가들 기대도 다다디 내가 감상되라 용자 따지 힘주 제와도 되네 수수기 홍시봐도 자지 동비 탐랑라 해봐서리지데 개 로나 마음바 관리 차그래서 가시 따지 힘주 제시 내라 마롱이나 마음바 관리 차그래서 어디 걸더니 관리지 해야인스.
So, my question is primarily to Rajesh, and if others presenters want to respond, then it's okay. We have been talking for the last 2 days that in science we have traditionally relied on a third-person perspective, and we try to avoid including the first-person perspective, and so the idea of the consciousness part. So, and now we also talked about we are reaching at a certain limit in the scientific method. So in the future, if we are able to include this first person or the subjective inquiry into the scientific method of investigation, what kind of results or the benefits it will going to bring forward in terms of the development of science or knowledge?
That's a big question. I also think I would like my fellow scientists to address it. Gael has also talked about third-person inquiry. I think that the restriction of science to measurable third-person inquiry is a particular historical choice. There's no inevitability to it, right? And already if you go outside what we might call the natural sciences to the social sciences, it's routine to include first-person choice. So economics, for example, or so let's take political science, right? Political science tries to study who's going to win in an election, let's say. But an election outcome is entirely based on subjective first-person choices. And yet we have good predictive models for how that will turn out. So I think that there is nothing in principle stopping that from happening. But I think there's a deeper issue of if we want to really understand consciousness, which is more than just voting choices and things like that, we will need much, much better ways of getting to people's first-person choices. Now, that kind of technology is coming, and Eric and others will be talking about that. So I think it'll be fantastic in the next couple of decades.
제가 아니 디워드 가고 두스 제가 아니 세리기 나로라 아니 단다 강사 순배기 딱답디 마토 아니 배주 맞이 고야디 겸생 신요 말스 코디 로규 나로라 당분 고든지 진 수배기 겸생 때니 단다 아니 딘데 로디에 차디 요레스 제가 디마도 신배기 아니 다 겸생 스키요 말스 모요니 줄라 직 단다 만주기 아니 지금 Rangjung Senrik Shedia da Tiganashi, Dele and Machilo Gage, Energy Chizok Senrik Nangola, Chimbina, and Chapsik Senrik in Benere, Penjur Senrik in Benere, Zuk Nangola, Concept Tangbuk, Taktab D, any Pejuchi Yores, Chezapecha Shabimbina, any Nanzuchika, Vuduchi was, Vuduchi Capsula, any Vudu Chingi D. Chingi Mimang Tsuki, any Vumi Sula, any Visholu Malu Siadi, Umi Chingi Tsuki, any Susuki, any Kansa Susu, Gerik when Tajo, any Chadi Yores. Yimina, Vudu Majive, any Mitsuki, and Vudu Chevi Gela, any Miko Top Sisa Resiaki, anything, Soba Chip to Yore, Soba de Kalakansam, any Tiwa Chagores, Chazadilla Duzambala, any Dik Nangola, any Kansa Tanguki, any Nua Shache, any Lagache Diadi, Lhakdor Tula, Yung Diores. Tiganashi, any Tatandig, Chala, any Kansa Tanguki, any Takta Yamena, any Kansa Tanguki, any Nua Denzo, any Shendo Chetanki, any Tablam in Benere, Tiganashi, Tuji in Benedenzo, any Yarge do Yore Yarge, Dudu Sambala, any Nizu Shendo, Yar Yunguriches and Mombala, and Dik Tola Yarge Jungurisam Gudus.
So the third-person perspective has a long history of using of methods, control groups, placebos, randomized control groups, a whole set of statistical methods to measure results. And so I think a similar procedural method such that investigators in different places can use the same techniques and procedures will certainly help a first person's perspective. But those methods are yet to be developed. So I think that's what's lacking, is the methods and consistent, reliable methods to investigate a first person perspective.
강사 순백이 아니 딱답 되게 나올라 아니 지게 장도 거야다 아니 지게 제바체기 아니 탑람 망고 주용도 요레스 제가 단다 아니 딘데기 아니 제니 그다지 나올라 강사 당부기 아니 딱지 제답디 가시는 야레 두요 마레스 라빈베나 아니 강사 당부기 뇽와 아니 천지 제베기 아니 다 탑람 제답직 아니 야고치니요 마레스 제다디 아니 모토비 김생 때니
This is a question for Geshe and then a related question for the scientists. If the spirit enters into us soon after the formation of the zygote, then does the soul or spirit also divide when a monozygote divides to form identical forms?
The spirit sigdo inju namhi sigyo sare. Namhi thokma chagza joroba pame kuran tusaj. Tina namhi chawaina da dine zygote sedi kopar mang rudu. Entana he namhi goshe jamne mang rudu yorves. Udiresha.
zygote jik ani tanda tumbuchaji ani bu sema charuda chande sema. Chida disha du zambala ani sheba goshe tigirves.
Chema chawdu. Chema chawdu segoro. So basically it's not so much about dividing the mind or consciousness. It is really the mind entering into two different places. It's not just one mind getting divided.
단항하러 저기 파마들레 기발라 당하러 저기 레도 아니 저와도 몸보질로 뛰고요. 이거서 베라 빼나 가서 받을은 저기 거서 아니 도메레스 도메 인전에 두스니 주니는데 다 마도 아니 레도 아니 주가 몸보지 주는데 마이 나이니 거서 안 두스니 토르레스 토 세디고는 두스치네 다 알아서 버도 봐도 몸보 쉬우지 여러 받다 참 대대 이전에 다 두스치네 뒤 거서 레여 봐이나 그러서 니자 두스 냠던 줄레 냠도 두스 차한디고는 다 목이 아니 공부들 가가니 차한 두스니 기
And this is slightly different explanation. Because when we talk about the intermediate state beings, it's not just one. It's so many intermediate state beings looking for a home. Okay? So two of these intermediate beings who have the same karmic potential and same karmic connection with the future parents, they might together come and enter into the zygote and then get separated with separate consciousness.
당가 마무데 차서 연구한데 그저 저한테 라금 도와 네 되게 전부 인송도 또 신나 삼성 그래서 나도 남시 지디 남신이 차요 말이야 알아 지당 나도 재미송네 남신 멤버 남시 년년면 비치 연주세 줄와 그래서 남시 많이 받지 남시 뭐지라요 말이야 생진 많이 받지 ting이라서 봐 생진 줄아요 말이야 대 코란데니 다 지금 갈수 남비 아니 좀 돈지 줄에 고타트 줄에 대송다 남시면비나 남시 멤버지 남기 응어지라요 매와 인송사 단다 치만이 따버지나 남시 시디 고세자니 아주 빨리 나시 제가 지니 근데 고세자 비자 말이야 코란 그 리기 양침 조비 갑라 아니 바 남시 니그 양침 저비 땡지 치만이 아니 코 대원 다 등세지 니 kilengyor와 덴디가 니 리지 넘버 멤버 3지 무쳐바 인송자 아니 마시기라 뿌니 디님도 차비 리디 사비 디오티라 테니 아니 양침 저니 지기 여러마도 남시 시디 고세자니 아니 지와레 남양세기 말이야
So there is more or less similar answer, which is to say that it is not just one mind which gets divided into two, but it is basically the mother who is going to give that birth has accumulated certain karmic connection, because of which two spirits are able to enter at the same time, and then that produces the twin. Yeah.
Okay, so here are two questions that I will combine for the scientists. And it's sometimes we learn about a phenomena by exploring the extremes or the endpoints. So the questions are, when does consciousness start? Is it during fertilization of egg and sperm? And how do we understand that? And what can we learn from near-death experiences where the mind and the brain seem to potentially separate?
For the first question, when does consciousness start? This is one that I'll simply say, I don't know. I don't think that science has the tools again to measure where it starts. So I have no problem saying I don't know. As for the second question, near-death experiences, it's a controversial topic. Some people will say that a near-death experience causes perhaps anoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain, which causes neurons to fire in abnormal fashion, which then gives rise to some almost dreamlike state or some experience that is then remembered. Other people will say it's a more spiritual experience. And so I don't think that we have an answer what happens during a near-death experience. It could just be a simple response of the brain to lack of oxygen, or maybe there's something more. So at this one too, I don't think that there's a definitive answer.
Can you extend that to not just near-death experiences, but certain fairly well-documented cases where electrical activity seems to have ceased for a while, you know, deeply cold people, etc., who eventually come back?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. Perhaps, you know, the body goes through a certain state, perhaps, again, lack of oxygen, lack of nutrients, so that it causes neurons to act in a certain unusual or different fashion. That would be the reductionist point of view. If there's something more, I'm not exactly sure what that might be.
Tiwani dus, ne tiwa tangbu de kares la bina, ane manzu ki nanglo la ane sheba thongman gozu ya di kadun gozu yores, chik ta miji salon gyurim ki la ane chik kam karmani thongmar dewe ki nekaps la yungu yorwe, yamena ane di ki ane chik ge ki tuzu chiraba chik la chungu yorwes. Siya ki tiwa dila ane gelang korangi ane shingi mes nga shingi me laya la ganges ke mindus chaza ane thande ki nekab la ane dinde ki nezu de ane shendo chewe ki nganzo la ane tabda yochi yo mares tiwa niyo di khardus la vimbena thanda ane near death experience like do konzo kin ta delo so ro dinde ane me khashi ane chik dabyon da ane naza dinde ki kembe ane chik dus chine shibe so ra che imbena ane ko ta shiro che che ane mashiu chi so rang je lo yon delo so ro che du sambala ane di ka dida ane deve ki nezu kol ane shiro chi shu shedo cheza ane cheza antan delo dinde ki near death experience yan delo so ro dunzo yong yores dunzo yong me kapsla ane nganzo chowal kharji grisla mena medzo ane chik nilam tang ge beson ro lanji ge beson ro denji ge beson ro ane chik na wung nang la sa du yo so nyala lewe ko so ro dinde sorwa ji yores ina ta di kharchini ji ge yores du zambala ane sibe ki ane le khashi yores cheza le sibe ki len chik khares la bembena ane chik nedan khashi ko la nganzo lebala ane solung de tangi shimba ane mara du zambala ane lebe ki nanglo yebe ki chabung du ane lega thukche ane lo club du ta khangyu monju khorim mebe tangwe ki gyomsel tene ane dinde ji ge yores ya chi yung yores khashi ki ane chik la da kunjo da dinde gebe ki ane nawa jebe ki gyomsel tene ta di chik chojo ki nyamne da dewa yowa yamena ngos dinde ta kunjo da dinde da dewa yobe ki ane deshi jaban chi chi yores ta khandar manda di kharcha di yores la bena ane chik lebe ki yamena chik ta leze ki lega chita chik toni ane yong dia chi yores cheza ane dia an thanda deshi cha samwa ji nganzo shingi me sungsro cheza dije la gelang khorang kharshung la bena ya mi khashi ane chik chagri te che and yang bede suku choze de mau shiu cha che yang temba thor ya da dinde kapsla ani temba thola mantur ki ani nekap din zul yang dinde ki ni zuri dinde nyoma chi do lol da ma da shar yu che da ani dinzu da chi ba res la so che da dile zuma gelang ko ki dinzu thangma chap ge re su che da nganzu suku nang lo la yuring bu ani seju mandang mara wa che che laya da solung mandang wa che che ani mara wa che che laya dinde kapsla ani dinde ki ta nang da ma da sharia di yungu yo res.
And just one more thing. Regardless of the mechanism involved with a near-death experience, people that come out of such an experience are profoundly changed. And that's so, whatever the mechanism is, it is not to negate their experience at all, because it is a profound experience onto themselves. What is the underlying neurological mechanism? We don't know. But their feelings after such an event are true. And so that doesn't negate any of their feelings.
제자다 딘데게 아니 데로게 소기 갑스키 아니 용와 된조 아니 원제 처분기 내가 제단게 토네 아니 대시 칸데스 야구민 디 ngazo 신기 매비 임비나 아니 콘수기 ngo 가린 용구 요와디 아니 ngo요니 차티 요레스 제자디 아니 ngazo 기타 지가 케 말레마디데 체투 마레스 대원한시 아니 니주 망고지 가린 용구 요레스 라베나 안 딘데게 아니 단다 갱에 중제 아니 제르 수다 마시시제 ngazo 준데나시 라데베 미딘주기 안 삼로 당당다 시주 토리 아니 교와친부 아니 조데와 딘데 ngazo기 통구 요레스.
Let me.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for the first question about consciousness, I mean, let me at least offer the possibility that perhaps asking the question, when does it start, is not the most illuminating question. To give you an analogy, suppose you were to ask, when does, and this is in Chris's world, when does condensing gas become a star? I don't know if there's a good answer to that question, but it turns out that a better question is, what makes a star into a star? And it turns out it's fusion that converts hydrogen into helium. That's the best sort of mechanism through which stars generate the energy that they do. So it may turn out, therefore, that to answer what is consciousness, asking the question when it starts may not be the best way to get to what makes consciousness.
제가 대화 당부시던다 시와 가두 아니 고주 그랬어야지 제가 아니 디 대화 듣다 아니 가두 고주 그랬어야지 아니 대화 약고시 차 요레 삼기 민두스 pecha shabimena di again Chris Korangi tanda ane lobzek nanglo la tiwadi kuya yore pecha shabimena ane panang le yebe ke tedu tingba den su ruru chache ane kama khadu thubu yore se ya tiwadi kubimena ane tiwadi yakos chagu yo mares yimbena ane tedu den so soje ane negap jigla ane ta kharse da tenshu so soje ane sobe ke ane gyumzen le dene dik nanglo da jig hydrogen ki ane du den so helium ki ngol gyodo ya da dene jig gyumzen le dene ane jan mawe to ya ki ane sakami kutubna de so ane deshi gyamna ane ya chag yores chida dile du sabala ane jig khadu ane sheba go tugre se ya ki ane keja dile ane sheba se ya dik ane ko nedan khare dik cheju khar kar yores se ya ki tiwach dene keja shibe mena ane ya yore rusus.
I'm going to finish with this one. Since all life comes from the same genetic source, the same genetic code in both plants and animals, which genes or what part of the genetic code is responsible for determining the characteristic of being sentient?
So I don't want to just answer that question. I think all these questions, whether plants are conscious, when consciousness starts, I just want to offer one possibility that we still don't know what a single cell is about. And not to say that that's enough reason to think that consciousness starts at the single cell level, but just to have the humility to understand that there's a lot going on in a single cell that we don't know. So to take one example, if you think about DNA, right, it's already in a lot of ways it's already a proto-language. There are symbols there that are not really tied to. So for example, you have the codon where you have 3 nucleotides that cause, a lot of people would say, it causes a particular protein sequence. But there's also evidence to show it's completely conventional, that it could have been any other 3 nucleotides that caused the same protein sequence. So who decided which one to do? So there is this activity that you would call semiotic, that you would call conventional and you would call symbolic. And I think all of them have the same in common, right? Zygotes, plants, animals. So.
Tamuyina Tiwadi, any Tanda Gurmusa, Tiwadi Karis Lavimena, and the Vegeta Jimmy, Serik Nangola, and So Yova, So Yu Chinji, Dilla Duzambala, and Tishinda Simje, and Ninga, and Tomer, and Riziki Chungunjini, any Chung Yores, Yores. Kisi Di Imbina, any Riziki, any Cha Kankis, Ro, and Jikta Simjin Imbiki Cheju di, doing Taku Yores, any Tiwadi Reshawa, Jazadi. Land the Korangi Karkas Lavimbina. Any ta Zishing la so yo re Maresia, the Tigana Shinchika, and Kam Karmar Kindugondi, Nanola, any Sheba Kadun Zugre, Maresia, the Dusama, any Tivik Rig, Dahuda Chayungudus. Cheza Ani Anzo, Tivik, Tivik, Zukabale, Zambala, Peshananzo, Tabunjik in Bimbina, and Tabunjik, any Karache to Guimeda, Tabunjik, Cheju Karimi, Ama Jaja Sawajik, and Zukishingu Maresco, Tabunjik, any Negabale in Zambala Imbina, Dinala, Nizumambuchi, any young digures. Chazada de la Zambala, any Tajik, any de Jen de la Teni, any de Chungu, Negab de la de Chungu, the She Tumar, special Shabimbina, Manzu Rizek Nalo, Nambuke She Zambala, Rizek Nalo, any Manzuki, Lunkam ki any Chiju Kanda, Roma Chik, any Tangzi Chingi, any Sangsik Joro, Sangsik, Cordon Sido Konzuki, and Cordon Chiraba, Diki, any Dilateni, and Jew de Chungre, special and Tiger Rig, this Ures, Yadinde, Kejashi Grace, Dilla Duzambala, Tanda Cod Sansi Chiki, any Tiger Rig Chiraba Chik Sugu, Toma Zanki, any Jajatamba Sansi Diki, and Tiger this Chabu Yorves, and Chabu Mares. Chichina, and Rizek, the Mambushi, which you will give them any Dimaibe, any Cordon Chiquachica, something Chiquachica, something Shimbachiki, and a Tiger Chiquachican Tigara, Suyo Sigres, Cheta de la Duzambala, yeah, and a Tiger T. Swingy, you do your Dinimina, Karanka Chicken Home, Gumzin, Chick the Ran, Zutu, the Nichadu, your Lester, the Dilla Duzambala, Chasamanchi here to Maris, Tinzo.